Did Andre's passing affect you more than other passings that you've experienced?
More than one?
More than other passings that you've
Oh, God. He was
More than
special.
30 years fans of professional wrestling have pondered the real reason for the tense relationship between Vince McMahon, the chairman of the WWE, and Andre the Giant, who was renowned during the Icon's last days, as speculation has swirling around McMahon's falling out has mostly kept quiet over the information about his previous close friendships last chapter. What really involving these two titans of the realm of wrestling, and why McMahon has an individual renowned for his unwavering determination and unwavering control found it difficult to talk about the heartbreaking recollections of Andre's passing now following years of conjecture. Vince McMahon breaks the silence at last on the tragic last few days before Andre the Giant's death revealed personal information regarding their relationship that provide fresh insight into one of wrestling's the most intricate friendships. Accompany us as we learn about the profound remorse that has haunted McMahon for decades. The world's McMahon and Andre bond of professional wrestling is constantly evolving with changing partnerships and changing plots. But for years the companionship between Vince McMahon and Andre the Giant remained steadfast until it collapsed. Separated as McMahon established his business on the backs of innumerable celebrities, none had a particular place in his heart for Andre. Acted as several sources near the chairman of the WWE has revealed whether Vince McMahon's all-time favorite, the greatest wrestler of all time, was without a doubt Andre Rousnoff. The Vince McMahon is the eighth wonder of the world. Shawn Michaels was always one of his favorites. Was his preferred in the 1990s. The Undertaker became close in the 2000s. But Andre went beyond these connections that signify more than merely a commercial advantage, but a very personal relationship spanning several generations of the McMahons. This was more than just a connection between a companies. The main event was a family gathering. Vince's daughter, Stephanie McMahon, once disclosed in interviews that she was raised with Andre, and considered him to be among I grew up with Andre, one of her greatest pals. My dearest friend, the Giant, wasn't this bond between Andre and me is rare. And youthful Stephanie strengthened the position of the Giant in the McMahon inner circular, forming an intricate network of relationships on a personal and professional level that extended well beyond the squared globe. The partnership had historical roots. Regarding Vince McMahon Sr., who first acknowledged Andre's potential as a star and promoted him as the main draw when Vince Jr. assumed control of the business, he carried on his father's custom of behaving like wrestling royalty with Andre during the 1980s wrestling boom. Hulk Hogan, however, was definitely WWE's. Andre was still Vince's greatest attraction, favorite worker and true friend. Andre and Vince shared behind the scenes numerous late-night road journeys and quiet occasions that reinforced their relationship with Bruce. A former WWE executive, Pritchard, disclosed that Andre and Vince had birthdays and were of the same age as were somewhat near to one another. But this wasn't simply business. It was a fraternal bond. Created under the particular strains of the wrestling business, their professional cooperation reached its peak at the third WrestleMania in 1987. What happened when Andre faced Hulk Hogan became one of the most famous in wrestling. Corresponds with the spectacle that WWE stated to be a record. 93,173 spectators at the Silverdome in Pontiac. Despite the fact that Andre would lose, the event solidified his legacy and emphasized the faith McMahon had in him to provide the business with the best key moment. Wrestlers who collaborated with both males talk a lot throughout this time of the preferential treatment that Andre obtained from McMahon as Andre walked into a room. The mood shifted. Even the infamously sour Vince McMahon revealed a more tender and reserved side. Only for the kind Giant. Several reports claim that Andre was one of the few individuals capable of transformation. McMahon's perspective on innovative choices, a luxury that is almost unheard of in the tightly regulated WWE leadership. What really made the partnership unique was their esteem for one another. Even in spite of his enormous drawing capacity and choices to employment elsewhere demonstrated devotion to the intern, McMahon's Vince made sure Andre was given respect in spite of his size created logistical issues. Custom transportation, in particular strength in rings and meticulous scheduling each choice illustrated McMahon's commitment to making room for his valued. Few fans are aware of the musician and friend Vince's level of protection. Andre is protecting him behind the scenes, away from the demands of celebrity, while enhancing his mystery. In contrast to today's the world of wrestling in the age of social media exposure, the infrequent appearances of Andre were meticulously planned by McMahon to preserve the larger-than-life giant aura, maintaining both his ability to attract and his health as well as his sense of self-respect. Refused. This strong connection creates what occurred during their last years. All a terrible unraveling that is even more heartbreaking. That would keep Vince McMahon in the dark for decades to indications of trouble, the fissures in the formerly unbreakable bond between Andre the Giant and Vince McMahon didn't appear like the progressive overnight illness that afflicted Andre during the decline throughout his mature life occurred slowly, almost imperceptibly. Initially, before it became difficult to by the end of the 1980s, Andre's acromegaly, the state that had provided his massive bulk, was having a more severe toll on his body. The illness that results in the pituitary gland to generate an excessive amount of Andre was changed by growth hormone. From the agile sportsman of his childhood becoming a man in excruciating pain all the time, the wrestlers remember witnessing Andre's struggle to grimace backstage with every stride. In spite of his stoic efforts to conceal the agony he continued to experience while wrestling, Vashon's promoter, Paul the Butcher, noted. And it was the reason he died. His enormous bulk caused his joints to deteriorate. He needed a brace underneath his back. His singlet and the straightforward action of walking turned becoming a struggle. Those around to both men disclosed that McMahon took note of these shifts with increasing anxiety. Even Andre forced himself to keep going. Carrying out the physical degradation unavoidably impacted Andre's disposition. He was formerly renowned for being kind and giving, especially with buddies like Vince McMahon. Andre grew more and more withdrawn and agitated. Lifelong WWE workers observed the Giant's disposition swings that many people ascribed to his declining physical state, and that he drank booze to make the constant agony. When you were his friend, he would go out of their way for you, remembered Leo Burke, a retired wrestler. But that positive attitude began to lessen as Andre's suffering increased. Even worse for McMahon to see the demise of a buddy was sad, especially given the needs of the Andre was compelled by business to follow his demanding appearance schedule. This conflict between Andre's medical requirements and WWE's operational needs turned into an increasing cause of conflict under Vince. Andre's leadership with McMahon and Siri had a great deal of freedom, and his schedule's flexibility frequently takes vacation time in between shows when Vince Jr. assumed command, although he put in place a more rigorous tour schedule that demanded that Andre show up more often and limited his vacation options worldwide. Since he previously employed former WWE employees, remember the private discussions regarding scheduling. Vince and Andre the Giant is becoming more and more resistant to the demanding journey requires that made his bodily agony worse. Even though these disputes were at first settled amicably, they symbolized the initial actual conflicts in their relationships. Red flags greater conflict to occur, as Andre's mobility kept getting worse. McMahon had to deal with a challenging situation that the WWE chairman was caught between his business intuition, which acknowledged the lasting appeal that Andre has and his individual care for his friends' welfare based on those near McMahon. He started making suggestions, changed positions that would reduce the physical effort made by Andre while maintaining he's in the news these days. Well-meaning suggestions, but were not consistently favorably appreciated and have centered his identity on being the unbeatable giant, and any thought reduction in his role aimed at the Bruce Pritchard said. The heart of his pride, that discussions regarding Andre's future grew more uncomfortable around the giant. Unwilling to accept any suggestion that he couldn't carry on the way he had, the two began communicating more. Tense where they used to spend hours together to talk about business and relationships and personal matters become less common and more formal. That era's wrestlers remember Andre retreating and isolating himself more frequently to his personal dressing room instead of interacting socially with McMahon and other entertainers as he was in the early. The indications of crisis in the 1990s were it's impossible to overlook Andre's in the ring. Once spectacular performances in spite of his size become more constrained. It was necessary to carefully coordinate it with his bodily restrictions, and his looks increased ever the perfectionist. Shorter McMahon regarding WWE's per-product quality to maintain his friendship with Andre in balance contrary to his vision for the business's future developments in WWE's presentation style made these problems as the business proceeded to faster-paced games with more athletes. And Andre's systematic style and restricted movement appeared to growingly inconsistent with the product's guidance, even though it is never stated clearly. People who knew both men felt the increasing disparity between Andre's skills and McMahon's innovative vision. These mounting conflicts were preparing for an impending break, the first thing that would change forever the connection between two of wrestling's most famous, determines the crucial falling out, the moment that split the decades-long the companionship between Vince McMahon, and early in the 1990s, Andre the Giant arrived. When Andre's agonizing reality, physical deterioration, could no longer be disregarded or circumvented in accordance with several sources with first-hand information, McMahon was the one in their relationship. It was he who ultimately brought up the topic. That had becoming more challenging. To stay away from retiring in the early 90s, journalists who cover wrestling for the WWE said Andre was obviously past his prime. They observed that while he is still performed sporadically, it was clear that he was quite uncomfortable and worried about the deteriorating health of his friend. And health, McMahon allegedly recommended that Andre ought to go and retire from the taxing bodily requirements of struggling with the idea, but seemed like a betrayal while having good intentions. To the arrogant giant, in spite of his state and declining health, Andre remains desired, possibly even required. To people close to Andre disclosed that he understood McMahon's recommendation not as worried, but as the chairman of the WWE concluding that he was no longer useful to the business, which led to a significant rift. The tension between McMahon and Andre was more than just Andre's wrestling future, but pierced the center of their disagreement in a personal connection, went beyond a straightforward disparity of words. Of opinion were spoken that was unable to remove the wrestlers in attendance. During this time, explained in progressively icy atmosphere whenever the two males were in the same structure. Friends who were previously inseparable are now maintained a professional separation from middlemen that frequently transmit messages. The final breach happened between them when Andre decided in 1992 to quit WWE completely, although this wasn't only a contractual issue, but a private one. Declaration following years of allegiance to the Andre, McMahon decided to work out his autonomy in what may be the only left up to him by seizing the initiative of his remaining career as a wrestler, and what a lot of wrestling historians think the last act of rebellion that caused Andre's appearance in their relationship competing promotions in the same year that he performed in Mexico and Japan. Nations where he had previously resided, enthusiastically welcomed by supporters in those areas that see Andre, even in his reduced physical condition, continued to be a noteworthy. Appearances on key occasions permitted him to carry on performing on. Separate from McMahon's words, worried but in charge influence then arrived at the time that Vince McMahon was seriously injured, and that the seventh wonder of the WWE's giant appeared on the television network TBS. Ted Turner, McMahon's sworn adversary, on September 2nd, Clash of Champions 20 will take place. In 1992, Andre created what would eventually be his final appearance on American television, not for the WWE, but for its rival, World WCW Championship Wrestling. Despite the apparition lasted about a few seconds. Interview portion of the programs commemorating wrestling's 20th anniversary on TBS has a huge symbolic significance. Vince is back in Stamford, Connecticut. According to reports, McMahon accepted the news with profound personal pain. According to Bruce, Vince Pritchard felt deceived by Andre's fleeting appearance turned into important not because of its content but because what the people perceived it to be cancellation of one of the biggest significant interpersonal connections. The appearance was very excruciating for McMahon, as it was more than merely business rivalry. That WCW had hired several former WWE athletes throughout the years, but Andre wasn't the same. Only a former worker who was related to dependable companion whose presence on the arrival's broadcast seemed intimate. Rejection following this appearance. Communication exchange between the two men completely stopped. According to those near both, there were no phone calls exchanged, no attempts at rapprochement created. The arrogant giant and the similarly the proud promoter stayed at a standstill, each awaiting the other's decision. The first step in mending the breach is this extended alienation resulted in the highest traumatic period in their history, one that would put McMahon under the strain of he would regret it for decades to come. To Andre's last days, the last chapter in the life of Andre the Giant, distant from the wrestling ring area where by the end of 1992, he was a legend. Andre's condition has gotten worse. Notably, his movement was extremely restricted, with close companions observing that he was having more and more trouble performing even simple motions. The giant, who formerly moved rather nimbly for his size, now walked primarily on canes. With every passing day, his body betrays him more. Day after day, in spite of his physical deterioration, Andre kept making intermittent Japanese wrestling appearances, joining forces with Giant Baba in Japan. His final encounter in professional wrestling took place on December 4, 1992, only 7 weeks prior his passing, when he joined Baba and Camera, the Rusher. Will win. A few discovered this inconspicuous tag match and the last time would be at a Japanese venue. There would never be an Andre the Giant performance. Has remained in touch with his France's homeland despite spending the majority of his adult existence exploring the globe, and in January 1993, he was informed that despite his efforts, his father had died. Due to his deteriorating health, Andre made the challenging voyage across the Atlantic to, according to friends, go to the funeral. For him, the journey was physically taxing. Needing to make particular travel plans to adapt to his size and state following at the burial, Andre chose to prolong his remain in France and visit his mother on January 27, her birthday 1993. Just before he passed away, Andre spent the afternoon undertaking a noteworthy task: typical card games with old pals in France. This easy enjoyment is a game of childhood with friends that viewed him as, instead of being a wrestler, Rouziamov attraction gave Andre a unique period of normalcy in a life characterized by his remarkable size. Andre had stayed the night before with companions before going back to his. He checked into his motel room. Demo in Paris intends to take a break before extending his stay with his relatives. That Andre slept in his hotel that night room without realizing it would be his final. January 28 morning, Andre the Giant passed away in his sleep in 1993. The official reason at age 46 was a consequence of congestive heart failure because his untreated acromegaly, his driver, and the hotel. His body was found by management in the afternoon when he did not show up for the big heart scheduled appointment that had fueled his remarkable physique. Had ironically eventually passed out while he had returned to his native land. When it was revealed that Andre had died, swiftly made their way through the wrestling community. But in those days before the internet, information spreads more slowly these days than we have a news conference today. Announcement of WrestleMania 9. And when the news started to circulate, Las Vegas through the company at the time the news was relayed to Vince McMahon. An important moment in his life. Bruce Pritchard of the WWE claims the chairman was deeply affected by the news. Even if they are estranged, the bond created over many years couldn't be undone. Due to recent disputes for McMahon, the shock wasn't limited to Andre's passing. Many had foreseen his early death because to his state, but that he had passed away prior to them having settled their discrepancies at the time. Sources close McMahon discloses that typically constituted the WWE chairman shown unusually high levels of vulnerability. The knowledge that there would not be reconciliation without a last discussion he was struck by his close friend with. According to McMahon, an unexpected force isolated himself for a moment after learning the private news processing of the loss. Prior to returning to his career responsibilities, Andre's body was transported back to the United States in company with lifelong companion Jackie Bernard. Claims to the desires outlined in Andre's will. His cremation was scheduled for 48 hours after his passing, but practical difficulties because of his size, the French, he couldn't be accommodated in cemeteries, requiring him to go back to America because of his ash reportedly weighing 17 pounds was dispersed across his cherished Alert Ranch, the one location in North Carolina where the giant had discovered tranquility and normalcy in his amazing life. Hulk Hogan produced the eulogy given by Andre during the service on the stateside funeral was attended by many notable figures in wrestling, including Randy Savage May, a Macho Man, Vince McMahon himself, and Young. In spite of McMahon's unresolved disagreements, traveled in order to make his final gratitude to the man who was crucial to WWE's ascent to renown in the world of wrestling. Lamented the passing of one of its greatest legendary personalities. Vince McMahon was left to deal with a complex mixture of sadness and feelings of regret that would trouble him for many years to come and ultimately take the lead him to at last speak up regarding days leading up to Andre the Giant died, ending the nearly 25-year silence. For many years, Vince McMahon kept up a public silence over the agonizing conclusion of his connection to Andre the Giant. The chairman of the WWE, who created an empire by governing tales, appeared incapable of hesitant to deal with this specific tale, and in 2018 the first noteworthy fissure in that exterior surfaced with the HBO's documentary's release. Only the documentary Andre the Giant signified a sea change in McMahon's readiness to talk about his complex for the first time feelings. For Andre, viewers on camera saw something few had ever witnessed: the poignant Vince McMahon's susceptibility as he thought back on his connection with Andre. The eyes of the typically stoic WWE chairman filled with uncontrollable weeping. "I heard that I'm not really an empathetic person at the moment. We didn't consider stopping here." What transpired was a magnificent demonstration of feeling from a man who is infamous for his steely poise. In this fleeting moment revealed McMahon's emotional condition, the intensity of emotion he'd carried for years. The documentary was silent, only touched a small portion of their complicated connection to McMahon, offering modest yet emotional support remarks about their connection and its disintegration. The complete narrative of their rift and McMahon's afterwards remorse was mostly unsaid in interviews to promote the documentary. McMahon acknowledged momentarily the suffering of losing Andre without making amends, but swiftly went back to talking about the Giant's career accomplishments and contributions to the wrestling of this pattern. Emotional susceptibility soon followed. By retreating to a more secure professional territory, defined his infrequent public appearances. After years of remarks against Andre, several more eye-opening incidents, and McMahon published a social media post in 2022. Article on what Andre's would have been celebrating his deceased friend's birthday as an athlete of a lifetime, while those who had followed in a seemingly normal manner in his career McMahon acknowledged the importance of this public recognition of their friendship, utilizing words that placed an emphasis on personal relationship over a professional relationship. That his most important breakthrough occurred with the publication of the documentary series Mr. McMahon on Netflix, which caught McMahon in a 2024 moment of extraordinary change regarding his raw bond with Andre. Uncut video of Vince McMahon at last breached the taboo during the agonizing last days prior to Andre the Giant's demise. It was revealed the depth of his remorse for their unsolved dispute. "I don't especially recall the last time I discussed with Andre," McMahon acknowledged in his voice in the documentary unusually gentle. "I possessed the capacity to forget unpleasant experiences." In spite of this assertion, the obvious anguish on these faces conveyed a different message. Weren't lost recollections, but profoundly buried ones. Now McMahon reappears for the first time, addressed the falling out directly, admitting that he had advocated for Andre's decision to retire due to real worry about his declining health. Andre wasn't merely another wrestler. McMahon admitted in maybe his most exposed moment on camera, "Andre was more than merely a company asset, or he was like family to me, and when he required me to comprehend what for him, wrestling was,